Hey guys, it's Mitch. How's it going? We're back for more Infinity Gauntlet, the blockbuster event of 1991. We're taking a look today at Infinity Gauntlet 2 by Jim Starlin and George Perez. So just before we get into it, if you enjoy the channel, if you feel like you might want to help out a little bit, go subscribe to my Patreon. Links are in the description, gives you early access to everything I do, helps out the channel, and helps to buy new comics. So now that we're past the first issue, we can skip all the preamble. If you want to catch up to this, you can always check out my previous videos on Infinity Gauntlet number 1, the Thanos quest, and if you feel like it, Thanos' early adventures in Avengers Annual number 7 and Marvel 2-in-1 Annual number 2. As it is, where we stand is that Thanos has acquired the Infinity Stones. He has used them in the service of death to wipe out half of all life in the universe, and we're now at the point where the heroes have to start responding. It's interesting in this series because every issue has a very specific purpose that it's trying to achieve. I can totally see this having been laid out as a series of plot lines. Issue 1 was all about backstory, because you need to fill people in on a new event. You can't assume that they've read the old issues. There's a lot of Thanos grandstanding and explaining his new position, explaining his power. There's a lot of him getting mad at death for not reciprocating his love, and then finally realizing that he hasn't followed through on his promise to wipe out half of all life in the universe, and then doing that. And we got a little bit of instantaneous reaction from some heroes, which we're going to build on in this issue. So from here, first one, introduction. This one, reaction. Issue 3 is decision, I would say, by the heroes. Issue 4, confrontation. Issue 5, immediate after effects and exacerbation. And then issue 6 is conclusion, which is a pretty basic framework to follow, but I just like being able to see that Jim Starlin has a framework in place, and he's not just kind of spitballing from issue to issue. He has a story in mind for this. It follows a very typical progression, but I mean, that kind of typical progression is used often because it kind of works. How often do you get through a miniseries or a TV show or a series of movies, and then you get to the end of it and you go, man, those guys had no idea what they were doing from episode to episode. I mean, that's the fucking new Star Wars trilogy right there. You imagine if they'd actually had this kind of framework in place when they started filming those? That would have been fun, right? Anyway, let's dive right into this one. As I said, this is penciled by George Perez. George Perez is taking his game up a notch. Well, I mean, his game is already extremely high, but he's showing us exactly what his limits are. And then he's going to go a bit past those limits and burn himself out halfway through issue 4. But in the meantime, we get some pretty awesome artwork. Cover on this one is, I mean, it's good. It's a good image. There's a shit ton going on. There's all the detail in the world, which isn't unexpected with George Perez. I think the only problem for me is that when you're a new reader, like, you're just picking this up off the shelf, you have no idea what's going on in this issue just by the cover. Which often works. It can add intrigue for a prospective buyer, but I think in this case, it just kind of adds, it's not even confusion, it's just like, I don't know what I'm looking at. Like, without context, it seems as though the Avengers and all of their buddies on Skype are watching The Fly. And they've seen it a bunch of times before, but they're really big Cronenberg fans, so it still knocks their socks off every time they see it. I feel the same way a little bit, to be honest. So yeah, good drawing, just confusing. And I can kind of understand why, because there's no specific event in this to focus on. There's no single character who's the hero. This is a big ensemble cast, at George Perez's request. The downside is, without a hero to focus on, you don't have, well, a focus for the cover. There's nothing to design around. Same with there being no specific event. So let's just get into this. I'm not even going to go so far as to say the cover was like a letdown or anything. I don't think that's the case. I remember picking this thing up off the rack in 1991. This was my first issue in this series. I didn't hesitate. I think it probably took me a minute to figure out what the fuck was going on, but I mean, that's the danger of jumping in at issue 2 of a miniseries, I guess. So we start out with a big splash page, Thanos reveling in his newfound power, having just wiped out half of all life in the universe. And we get a big splash page. It's a good drawing. It looks like it's been almost blown up, maybe, because, I mean, some of these brushstrokes are extremely thick. Not a ton of detail, but I guess you do just need an opening splash to kind of get the reader in motion. Kind of set the tone for things. And that's a little bit better. So we're starting out here. This is in New York, and a plane has crashed down on 5th Avenue. The Avengers are on site, and they move in to respond, although they're thinking to themselves, we can only respond to this one instance. We get the feeling this is happening all over. And they're just kind of an emergency response team at the moment. And this spread is incredible. This is absolutely amazing. I assume this cathedral is from a direct reference, like from this angle and everything, because the detail on this, the exactness, I can't imagine George Perez made this up. Yeah, no, I decided to check that. This is St. Patrick's Cathedral, which is a very nice one and apparently fucking huge. But yeah, getting that down exactly and then throwing all of the passersby in here as well as the emergency response teams, getting the broken plane in as well, and keeping it all in perspective, keeping them all the correct size in proportion to each other is unbelievably impressive. And then you get the Avengers flying in, and because they're coming in at a high angle, they look pretty fucking huge compared to everything, which is appropriate. Okay, so now we're going to go through a one-page-at-a-time sequence as various characters in the Marvel Universe react to what has just happened. The first guy we're visiting in with is Quasar, which feels like an odd choice. Quasar does have a new book. He's been out for a couple of years now at this point. He still always felt like a B-tier character, so I'm not for sure on the choice here. I think the obvious thing, though, is that since this is Jim Starlin, he does his cosmic stuff. Quasar is basically the inheritor of Captain Marvel, because he has the quantum bands. Jim Starlin liked him some Captain Marvel, so I think he's just kind of slotting him in as a placeholder, essentially. I don't know about the narration too much. Apparently he's sitting at his office at Vaughn Security Systems, wondering what he can do to help. Meanwhile, what he can do to help is turn into a superhero, but I guess he didn't think of that until the secret bookshelf slid open into another dimension where Epic, who I think is basically like his mentor slash advisor or something like that, has been communing with a pair of eyes. This is Adam Warlock. But Epic tells Quasar to change into your superhero underwear and get flying. So that's what he does. This all looks fine. Meanwhile, we cut back to the Kree Empire. Last issue, we got the Skrulls reacting to the snap, and of course deciding that it was the fault of the Kree that this happened, so they attacked them, or launched an initial assault. Now we're seeing it from the Kree point of view, who, of course, basically have the exact same idea. This must be the Skrulls. We've got to go and launch an offensive. Now, I haven't read the rest of these issues recently, so I don't remember if this goes any further in this miniseries. I kind of get the feeling it doesn't. So I'm not sure if there's really much of a point in this other than to show that this is happening in other places in the universe. This page is pretty great, though. All the great Kree technology. This shot here, George Perez seems to love his vertical shots with a little bit of negative space. It's good stuff. And back in New York at Doctor Strange's place. We've been spending some time with Doctor Strange in the last issue. We're going to do it again. Doctor Strange has called Hank Pym in to check on the Silver Surfer, who's crashing on his couch. It seems that Doctor Strange's only idea to help him was to put him in some sunlight. So basically, the skylight that he crashed through. Turns out that's actually how he recharges, is through solar energy. So that all came up aces. And as Doctor Strange sees him to the door, he starts to zone out, basically because his astral form is being summoned to the astral plane with a fucking awesome splash page. So this is Doctor Strange communing with Adam Warlock. Adam Warlock's spirit seems to be bopping around from plane to plane, telling prominent magic users, or prominent figures, I suppose, that this is more than a local phenomenon. This is universal, and that everybody needs to act. And he's kind of calling them to his standard. Which is interesting, considering that Adam Warlock wasn't scheduled to be in the storyline at all, except that Jim Starlin didn't want a lesser writer to use him for a project he had lined up. I suppose originally this would have just been without a leader figure, but that doesn't really seem like Jim Starlin's style, so I wonder how that would have gone if he hadn't decided to use Warlock. But this page is excellent, with his astral form being yanked out of his body, and directing your eye down to the Warlock figure. We of course don't reveal who this is just yet. We're not going to find out till later in the issue. But these astral plane pages are just spectacular stuff. Like, this is kind of a montage with the all the elements repeating and kind of fading off into the distance. Just some wild shit. Doctor Strange he can't totally trust him right off the bat, because this is just an entity reaching out to him. I imagine that sort of thing happens to Doctor Strange every once in a while, at least. So the entity offers to open its soul to Doctor Strange and in return, Doctor Strange will do the same thing. And once that's complete, Doctor Strange's apprentice, I believe, yanks him out of the astral plane in a puff of smoke. That's a pretty nice transition, actually. And Doctor Strange is 100% on board with Adam Warlock. Cut again to a new character in the Marvel Universe as Doctor Doom reacts to the loss of half of, at least in part, half of the population of the world, but his immediate focus is half the population of Latveria. So Doctor Doom is going to intervene, at least partially on behalf of his people, on behalf of on behalf of humanity, but also at the opportunity to further his own scientific knowledge and personal power base. And yeah, it's just, a big declaration of Doctor Doom is getting involved with a nice big shot of him here. So if you just ever wanted to see a shot of Doctor Doom drawn by George Perez, there you go. It's in a comic. It's a pretty good one. From there, we cut back to Titan, where the Titanites are also reacting. Mentor, of course, who is Eros' father. This is Eros, this is Firelord, this is Drax the Destroyer in his original He-Man costume. They're all trying to figure out what's going on. There's no real hint at this point, although Eros has his suspicions that his brother Thanos is behind this somehow. And then all of a sudden, Eros just disappears. And then reappears at the side of Thanos, leaning over him, wielding the Infinity Gauntlet. Eros realizes he's bound to his seat and also realizes that behind Thanos lurks Mephisto, who is also an extremely powerful figure, probably more powerful than Eros himself. So realizes that he is in probably the worst trouble of his entire life at this point. Pretty good page, nice and ominous looking as he just kind of looms over Eros. Eros takes a closer look around to see who else is at this particular event. Looks over and sees Mistress Death. Oh, that doesn't make things any better. And then looks down at the platform that's supporting the shrine to Death that he's sitting at and sees Nebula wandering around. And Nebula, of course, is a barely conscious walking husk. And Eros wonders what the fuck is going on. Thanos says, this is a family reunion. We've got you, my brother. We've got my granddaughter, Nebula. We've got my new bride, Death. We're all going to get together and have a picnic. And Eros is like, well, if this is a family reunion, why not bring Mentor? And Thanos is just like, Mentor was not invited. Apparently, he made sure, when he disappeared half the people in the universe, that Mentor was included in that number. Eros tries to influence Thanos using... Eros has, emotional manipulation powers, which might be the kind of thing that would normally work on Thanos, but of course, with the Infinity Gems, they don't do fucking squat. And Thanos takes care of it by pulling a Neo on him and just erasing his mouth, which he finds particularly humorous, as he does with most things where he's just being kind of cruel. Thanos in this series is a pretty jolly guy. He's always up for a good laugh. Good pages, but nothing spectacular on them. They're more about plot development. And now we're going to cut back to Avengers HQ, where Captain America is going to bring us up to speed. So this is the big splash page showing all of the heroes they're aware of that have disappeared in the snap. And it looks like a pretty comprehensive list of heroes as well, until you look a little closer and you go, wait a minute, a lot of these guys are on teams. And a lot of these guys largely comprise their teams. Most of that particular team is on this list. So for instance, we've got X-Factor. Everybody is here except for Cyclops because when they were shopping this idea around to the other editors, basically they would have to make a decision whether their characters would be allowed to be used for the storyline. And the idea of a big summer crossover didn't sit well with a lot of people because it wasn't a proven success, the big summer event thing. So, Bob Harris would only authorize Cyclops and Wolverine to be used for this crossover. At least those are two of the characters that you would want to get in there. But, looking at the X-Factor issues that came out around this time, it's the Whilce Portacio run, which basically does not reference this at all. X-Factor battles their ship, X-Factor battles Apocalypse's goons, and then the ship sends them off to the moon to go and hang out with the Inhumans. So, at least they're off planet for a bit, but yeah, there's no kind of causality between Cyclops being on the moon and then coming back to Earth to deal with the Infinity Gauntlet crisis. The X-Men, I'm pretty sure this is around the time when the X-Men are assumed to be dead by the rest of the heroes. So it makes a bit of sense why they're not mentioned here, except, of course, that Wolverine will be showing up and no mention will be made of that. We've also got Black Cat, Black Panther, Daredevil. I'm pretty sure Daredevil's just kind of, fighting Kingpin around this time. Diamond Lil, some guy named Makari. I don't know who you are. Luke Cage, U.S. Agent, and then Alpha Flight, New Warriors, Fantastic Four, and West Coast Avengers. So an awful lot of B-tier guys, awful lot of B-tier teams who for some reason didn't feel like it was a good idea to get in on the summer event and maybe get some extra eyes on their comics. I don't know what that's about, unless they just needed to pick some guys like, well, these guys aren't particularly important. Like, what's going on in Alpha Flight around this time? Is anything going? Is Alpha Flight still a comic? I guess it is if Mark Pacella is drawing this a year or two from now, right? Anyway, just kind of an interesting page with like a whole bunch of dudes being drawn here. None of these look like stock images. I think George Perez just drew each one. And it looks, they're pretty cool, like file card images. If you ever need a template for what like a file card image should look like, you could do a lot worse than this page. So the Avengers are trying to coordinate with whatever heroes are left. Cap asks if there's been any word from Excalibur or the X-Men. So the X-Men do get mentioned. I got that wrong. She-Hulk hasn't heard anything, so she figures maybe they're off-world. And I'm pretty sure that's the last we're going to hear, at least of Excalibur. Meanwhile, Thor is acting like he's mourning the loss of all these heroes. Meanwhile, he's thinking about how he's not actually the original Thor that they think he is. He's not like Asgard Thor. He's a replacement hero, and currently he's, I don't think I was reading Avengers around this time, but he's like fooling the Avengers into thinking he's old Thor, and he's doing all the thee and thou talk to try and like keep it all on the level. But as far as I know, this is the guy who eventually becomes Thunderstrike. So, 24 issues. There's worse. They don't wait that long anymore. Drawn by Ron Frenz. Ron Frenz is a competent artist, but I don't think anybody was particularly excited about seeing a Ron Frenz book. You know what? Actually, I think I'm wrong about that. I think there are some Ron Frenz diehards out there. Maybe I just wasn't ever one of them. So from there, we're going to cut to Asgard, who are also reacting to the situation. They've called a great pantheon with, like Zeus, Osiris, Svarog, Manitou, just from, like one from every culture kind of thing. What I would assume is the head god from every culture, although I don't see Jupiter anywhere. I guess if you got Zeus, you don't need Jupiter. And they're discussing the current crisis. They don't say anything about their particular pantheon being, halved. So I guess the gods were all untouched. It's just their, cultures. But they all swear to band together to fight this new threat. This shot here at least is cool, with them all sitting around the table pretty compactly, but that's okay. And the cool shot of the rainbow bridge leading to the Earth. That's a pretty nice page. Meanwhile, Quasar is flying through space, and he lands in space. He kind of ends up wherever he's going. Epoch tells him, all right, we're here. Quasar is like, what are we here for? And Epoch's like, we'll know when we see it. So Quasar just gets to hang out in space for the next event to happen. Then cut back to the motel room, where Pip and Gamora and Adam Warlock were hanging out and healing in their newly acquired bodies. Gamora, of course, disappeared in the snap. And Adam Warlock, last time we saw, had cocooned himself. I assume building his strength for this issue. So Pip is kind of stuck on his own, just sitting around drinking beers and watching Alf. Everybody watches Alf in this universe. Is it because Alf is a Marvel property? Like he has his own comic? Or he did, anyway. And as far as I can tell, Alf isn't even going anymore at this point. They've already had that incredibly depressing last episode where Alf escapes and is captured by the CIA and is never heard from again. In case you never heard, that's how that series ended. With Alf undoubtedly being fucking dissected. Like, I'm sure they were setting it up for, the next season he's going to escape, or he's going to be rescued, or some shit like that, but they didn't get the green light for that season, so we just get the season where Alf gets abducted and disappears from the face of the earth. Hard to say if that one's worse than the way the Dinosaurs TV show ended. The late 80s, early 90s had a few shows that ended with like a surprisingly depressing conclusion. Anyway, we're done talking about Alf. I think George Perez really digs Alf. But Pip is just hanging out watching TV when a big explosion goes off in the room. Pip goes to investigate and the cocoon has burst. Adam Warlock has finished, powering up, and now he's going, as he says, after Thanos. Cutting then back to Stephen Strange's house, where the Silver Surfer wakes up. Nice transition with the Doom face slowly coming into view. So Dr. Doom has traced a signal from Doctor Strange's house that he thinks is linked to this. And this was Doctor Strange communing with Adam Warlock, actually. And it makes some sense, even if that kind of signal can't be picked up by, like, telemetry, which I actually think it was in this case. But, like, Dr. Doom is well-versed in mysticism and all that kind of stuff, too, so that's fine. But Dr. Doom busted into Doctor Strange's house and had his Doom bots rough Doctor Strange up, all while Silver Surfer was catching some Z's. And then Silver Surfer comes to and says, "Unhand my friend," and Dr. Doom goes, "Fuck you, buddy," and blasts him away. Apparently they've met before, and this is kind of how that went last time, too. Cool shot of the Silver Surfer getting shot here. So with the Silver Surfer incapacitated, Dr. Doom can focus on Doctor Strange, basically saying, "Tell me everything you know about what the fuck is going on here, or I'm going to fry your face off." When all of a sudden his Doom bots are destroyed, they look up into the smashed skylight, and there stands Adam Warlock, and he even brought Pip along with him. Big ol' splash for Adam Warlock, and I mean, his costume is a choice. I don't think this is exactly his costume from the 70s, but if I recall, he had on, like, the typical briefs and, like, a red tunic, which, you know, maybe wouldn't have looked too cool, but it does mean, like, there's just a lot of blackness in this. It's still a cool image, at least. From there, we cut back to Thanos, who is trying to win Mistress Death to his side. She's at least conceded to sit in the throne that he made for her, while Thanos has, like, these living vines kind of tear Eros and Nebula apart for her entertainment. And he's having a great time. Mephisto kind of points out to him, "Dude, your wife is not digging this." And he looks, and like, she just has this look on her face, like, he's just the worst trailer trash. This is like the equivalent of trying to win her heart by, like, making her laugh with fart jokes and, like, putting on mud wrestling on TV. So Thanos lets them go, and Eros has a second to go, "Dude, I am in so much fucking shit," as Thanos kind of looks down, looking completely insane. So we cut back to Doctor Strange's house, where Adam Warlock is explaining to everybody that, you know, there's a great peril. They've got to all band together, and he's going to lead them. Dr. Doom, of course, has zero interest in this. He has no reason to trust Adam Warlock. Adam Warlock could theoretically do the thing where he opens his heart to Dr. Doom, but I don't think Dr. Doom's really going to be, like, amenable to that. And he just kind of goes, "All right, you know what? Build your fucking army. We'll see how that goes. I'll help out as much as I want to," basically. Cut back again to Thanos, still torturing Nebula and Eros for the pleasure of Mistress Death. This time seems to be using the Reality Stone by unraveling and dissembling the two here. This is kind of what happened in the Infinity War movie, wasn't it? To Drax and Mantis, if I recall. And looks back at Death, and of course, Death is still she just kind of sneers. And Thanos goes and has a tantrum, because of course he does. We've said before, he's a narcissist. He doesn't actually have any interest in what Death wants. He just knows that he wants her, and he figures if he does enough nice things, then she'll love him. And he essentially throws a tantrum. And for a guy wielding the Infinity Gauntlet, a tantrum is a seismic event. So a wave of energy flashes out from the shrine to Death and just goes out through the universe. I suppose it could be just the galaxy. But one thing it comes into contact with is a dying star. And on contact with the star explodes, destroying everything in its solar system, which also happens to be where Galactus is. This comic does a pretty good job of reminding us that there are more entities in the universe than just what is on Earth, at least. This, of course, pisses Galactus off mightily because he was just getting ready to eat a planet that was in that solar system that just got destroyed. He muses on the fact that this is the second meal that Thanos has taken away from Galactus. The first one was at the end of Silver Surfer number 48, which we went over briefly, where Silver Surfer went back to Galactus to get his soul fixed. After he leaves Galactus, Thanos shows up and says, "Hey, buddy, I got some shit I'm doing. You don't want to get involved." Galactus is kind of standoffish. While they stand on the planet, Galactus is preparing to devour. Thanos goes, "You know what? Seriously, just sit this one out," and he disappears the planet out from under them. But we get a cool shot of Galactus standing in his ship, all the cool kind of quasi-Kirby-esque tech. It's actually pretty Kirby-esque looking closer at it. You can't have a Galactus ship and then have it full of like Jim Lee tech. That would just make no sense. It's got to be Kirby tech. And Galactus, of course, plots revenge against this guy who keeps fucking up his dinner. From there, we're going to cut back to New York, where Cloak is just kind of morosely musing about the fact that Dagger is gone. I think she was actually on the list, wasn't she? Yeah, there she is. But that's kind of how it goes in this series. If you've got a pair of heroes, 100% guaranteed one of them was one of the ones that disappeared. But he's standing on the edge of a rooftop, being all moody, when all of a sudden there's an earthquake, and the entire city starts to shake. Buildings are falling down. Wolverine happens to be on the scene. No explanation for that, but who cares? And is able to save a woman and her child from a building falling on top of them. So that's nice. He isn't really able to save anybody else around them. A couple of more of them survive, though, by the looks of it. This whole sequence is incredible in terms of just straight up drawing. There's just so much detail in these buildings. There's so much consideration for like the angles and making sure everything is proportionally correct. I assume this, at least large portions of this would have been directly from reference and just, you cut off the tops of a few buildings. This is the Flatiron, right? But like, goddamn, there's a lot of drawing in here. It's excellent shit. Then we cut to Up in Space, as Iron Man is checking out some weird cosmic readings and thinking these might have something to do with the Great Disappearance, as it's called. Then while he's up there, something comes through and like demolishes this rig that he's got, like fucks up his armor big time. And this is the wave from the remnants of Thanos' tantrum. It just kind of emanates out through the universe. Galactus says here that the wave is at approximately 2% power by the time it will reach Earth. And it's still enough to, like, just demolish cities, basically. And worse than that, because, Iron Man gets knocked out of orbit here. I assume he's still within the atmosphere because he does fall. And he's able to at least stabilize himself. And then when he looks down, he sees the west coast of the United States. So this is like, I guess, California, which crumbles and falls into the sea. I don't think that's entirely how that would work, but, Jim Starlin doesn't always think in terms of practicality. He sometimes thinks in terms of abstracts. And, that certainly is a horrifying thought until you think about it some more and go, well, no, that's not how that would work. But, like, if he wanted the sea to come in and, swamp California and just, drown it, essentially, yeah, that could happen. But, like, if you're 10 or 11 and reading this, you're probably not thinking that. You're probably thinking, holy shit, America broke. It fell right into the sea. Bye-bye, Hollywood. And it is still a cool shot, at least. George Perez is doing what he can to make it look cool. I do wonder a little bit if you thought, man, that's kind of ridiculous. But, it's not like it's going to be the first time that George Perez is going to draw some ridiculous shit. Anybody working in comics in 1991 who has been there for a while has drawn some ridiculous shit in his day. So then we cut to the West Coast Avengers. Oh, I guess we didn't lose all of them. We got Scarlet Witch and Wonder Man and the mechanical Human Torch, like the original Human Torch, I believe. They appear to be all that's left of the Avengers West Coast, and they're searching through the rubble, and they can't find any survivors. Cool shot with the twin characters just flying around the Quinjet. From there, back to Asgard. Awesome shot of Asgard in ruins, with Odin overseeing things. And they're also recovering from an earthquake, because the wave hit them as well. And what it's done, in addition to, destroying the palace that's in Asgard, it's also shattered the Rainbow Bridge. So there's no way for the leaders of the pantheons to get back to their pantheons. They're all stuck in Asgard until this situation is resolved. Which is probably for the best. You don't really want to see gods exactly taking part in this fight, I think. You could do it. I don't think Jim Starlin's the guy to do it, though. It probably just had to be addressed because, you have gods in the Marvel Universe, and if you don't have them in a big cosmic fight, then what the fuck are they there for? So, let's just trap them all in Asgard and just say they're sitting on the sidelines for this one. Namor's around. He's investigating the after effects of the gigantic planet-wide quake and finds just like undersea volcanoes that are rising up and wreaking havoc on like the ecosystem. And, at first he's just like, man, that's fucking awesome. And then goes, wait a minute, that's going to cause fucking tidal waves. That's a problem. Cut to Namorita, who's flying over Atlantic City. And we get a brief stop with just a couple walking down the boardwalk who happen to look up and see a gigantic tidal wave sweeping in. Would wipe them out completely. That's a fun shot. Again, nice and ominous. Coming right at him, Namorita manages to scoop them up just before the tidal wave hits. So she's able to save 2 people at least, but that is all she's able to save. Everybody else in Atlantic City is dead now. And Trump Tower gets buried. So, I mean, he might have been in there too. Who knows? Another casualty of the Infinity Gauntlet. Cut to Thor. This is the heroes checking all over the world now. Thor's flying over Japan, basically, the string of islands, and he confirms they're just not there anymore. The sea has completely claimed them. And that seems a bit more likely, that islands would just disappear, even large islands. Back to New York, which is still largely untouched. Hasn't even really experienced any tidal waves or anything like that. It has had the earthquake, of course. And the Avengers are coordinating with every superhero they can that's still on Earth. So we've got Spider-Man, we've got Cloak, no dagger, of course. We've also got, the Inhumans, although I don't think they show up in this series. That would have been kind of cool. So now the Avengers, so they're coordinating, they're checking in with their West Coast division to see how things are going in California. Well, not so well. They're having to set up in Vegas because California doesn't exist anymore. And on the monitors, the prognosis is fucking grim, as it is just worldwide catastrophe. Which is horrifying, but worldwide catastrophe is kind of what the Avengers are for. They've dealt with that kind of thing before. They'll, I'm sure they think they can deal with it again. Or they hope they can anyway. And then one final flip back to New York. I think this is Georgetown, where Doctor Strange's house is the only one left standing in his neighborhood, which, I mean, it's a little funny. It does make some sense, though. You assume he's got magical wards and shit up. He doesn't even seem to have a crack in his house. Everything in the house has been shaken and destroyed. And they're like, what was that? Pip goes, something got God teed off. Adam Warlock is like, that's exactly what happened. Because Warlock knows with Thanos at the wheel, which he is now, this is just going to be the state of things unless they take action. Where if he gets in a bad mood for a second, that's entire solar systems at risk. And that's where we're going to leave off for Infinity Gauntlet number 2. So a pretty good issue. This is, more of a plot issue. Last one was more recap and just kind of hanging out with the characters. I did remember this as being a better issue in terms of the art than the first one. I think I was kind of wrong in that. It's more just those few splashes that really caught my eye. So the double page splash with the New York street with the plane crash down in it, and the splashes with Adam Warlock in the astral plane. That's all amazing stuff. Which arguably does beat some of the stuff in Infinity Gauntlet number 1. It's just Infinity Gauntlet number 1 had more in it spread out. So now we've had the immediate reaction of all the superheroes to the Great Disappearance, as well as the exacerbation as the cataclysms rock the planet. So next issue, we're going to have a call to arms as Adam Warlock summons all the heroes to him so that they can all make an assault on Thanos. Like I said, it's just nice to have that, point to point to point progression where you know exactly what an issue's trying to accomplish, and then it just accomplishes it. Good. I'm glad. If you're not fucking Alan Moore, whipping out crazy twists and just completely, keeping us in the dark until the amazing ending comes along, your best bet is to stick with a tried and true progression of events, which is what Jim Starlin's going to do. So that's all we've got for this one. Next time, like I said, Infinity Gauntlet number 3, it'll be a good time. But thanks very much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like, hit subscribe, hit the notifications so you know when the next one's coming out. Go over and subscribe on my Patreon. It gives you early access to everything I do, from the Blood Force stuff to the YouTube videos before they get uploaded to YouTube, as well as some Patreon exclusive content. You can also follow me on Instagram and DM me there for commissions, and you can join the Blood Force Discord server. But that's going to do it. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.